intellectually stimulating conversation. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, that is the SDGs, were designed to build a global partnership and a coalition aimed at creating universal well-being. The sustainable goals, which are anchored in human rights, serve as an international call to act now. They represent a blueprint for pursuing economic growth and innovation, social inclusion and equality, and environmental stewardship. The blueprint charts a course for all sectors of society to mobilize and work towards achieving these goals. Educating our students, and we're going to see some of our students this evening, to become discerning global citizens is central to us achieving a sustainable future. At Mount Madonna School, we are committed to fostering global citizenship by developing the capabilities and skills of our students to not simply understand the world in which they live, but to develop agency to improve it. We emphasize how actions, both big and small, can have immense impact worldwide. Indeed, many of our alumni have gone on to become leaders, and their work is having profound impacts on the world. And the MMS community takes great pride in their achievements. This evening, Amita Kuttner, who graduated from Mount Madonna School in 2008 and holds a PhD in astronomy and astrophysics from the University of California, Santa Cruz, will speak about how artificial intelligence, automation, and other emerging technologies are upending our way of life. As a student, their work focused on black holes, wormholes, quantum effects, in the early universe. In 2019, Amita ran for Canadian Parliament and served as Critic for Science and Innovation for the Green Party of Canada, bringing forward policy on artificial intelligence and emerging technologies. They ran for leadership of the Green Party of Canada in 2020 on a platform of justice, science, and resilience. Amita is co-founder of Moonlight Institute, a nonprofit organization that seeks to create frameworks for an equitable and just future, taking into account the realities of the climate emergency, as well as technology and decolonization. This evening is organized into 3 parts. The seminar, followed by the values-styled facilitated conversation led by our 12th grade students and Shannon Kelly, and finally questions from the audience. So please place your questions in the chat box. We are recording this event and we'll post it on the SDG website. So without further ado, I am very honored to introduce you to Amita.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be back. And before I begin, I would like to say that I'm speaking with you all from the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And I am committed to seeing their lands returned to them. So tonight, I'm going to be talking about AI. And so let me just share my screen. Everybody good? All right. So I'm going to try to incorporate a little bit about my own personal journey from being a student at Mount Madonna to entering federal politics, standing on a political stage and going right through the sciences in between. And you know what got me there, and then kind of the end result, the perspective that I ended with, that I feel like is actually what we need to transform our future, have a future on our planet, etc. So this is what I learned from working in policy around emerging technology. Now, before we really begin, we have to talk about some definitions, because in these subjects, there's a lot of confusion and everything. So the first thing that I'm actually going to start with is get out of this presentation altogether and do an interactive exercise with you all to ask you to frame our conversation with what are 3 words that come to mind when you hear artificial intelligence. So I would like everybody here to go to www.menti.com, enter that code, and type in your 3 words. And then I can check on the results and what people. So let's see.
I put the code in the chat in case anybody needs that.
Okay. Let's see if we have anything. Okay. Should hide this so nobody sees what other people are putting in, but. This is wonderful. All right. Still updating. Okay, so this is a wonderful place to start. And so before I go back to the presentation, I'm just going to pick out some of the biggest themes here. And I'm just super tempted to point out my favorites in here, but so let's talk about the fact that future robots automation are really big. So there's, I think, some clear ones in here. Yes, it's technology. I love that in there we actually have machine learning. Terminator is really important. Scary is relevant as well. But there's actually some really clear understanding here of kind of some of the risks, which is quite wonderful. But I think it's interesting that it's future, because it's very much already upon us. And I also think robots is interesting because robots, not necessarily always artificial intelligence or vice versa. So let us go back to this. So thank you for that background on this. So the very basic definition of artificial intelligence is a branch of computer science, and it's imitation of intelligent human behavior. But when it comes down to it, it's not necessarily going to be one type of thing. So we use the term artificial intelligence to mean machine learning, to mean very simple algorithms, all the way up to a complete concept of replacing human intelligence with an identical machine one. And taking into account also for us that we always approach machine intelligence from a very human mindset, which is very hard for us to get out of sometimes. But the thing is, artificial intelligence is very much here already. And as it saw, some of those words on there very much reflect that. So we see that it's part of social media. It's part of Siri, all these other things that we kind of have a lot of the time. And so we divide generally artificial intelligence into two main categories: specific intelligence and general intelligence. General intelligence is basically like full concept, could replace a human. And special intelligence or specified intelligence is one particular thing. So the ability to recognize speech or to sift through a bunch of images and replace them, those are one thing. And we very much have that in real life. And most of what I'm going to be talking about are the impacts of special artificial intelligence and not general artificial intelligence, because there are a lot of risks and possibilities and like a whole world out there to talk about in terms of what it means if we have a artificial intelligence level of a human. But we have so many immediate things to deal with general technological improvements that we're going to focus on that. So what are some basic examples? I think you're probably all quite familiar with these: self-driving vehicles, facial recognition technology, speech recognition, automated assistants, whether they're actually deployed or ones we've had as examples that can actually make calls for you, etc. Anything pretty much predictive or that learns. But there's also things like medical diagnostics. So we're seeing some really very interesting advancements around mostly image processing. So we find that a computer, through learning through images, can actually detect cancer better than a human can, sifting or learning about those images. And this is because the way that of thought of any machine is very directed in a particular way, where it is, in this case, looking and recognizing patterns. And it's also really important to notice that in a lot of these conversations, and what I hear, especially trying to hop over into the policy realm, is there is this dismissal of artificial intelligence as something that is actually upon us, because it does not mimic us in the way we would understand. So the way that we have looking at machine learning, where you usually have a block of unknown learning because you're sending a whole bunch of data into an algorithm and it's learning to process something, it comes out the other side. We don't know what its thought process is, but it certainly isn't something that we would recognize in the same way. So that there is this dismissal that this is actually here and something that's very present, reasonably scary, but also has a lot of positive potential. So some of the biggest risks and what got me into working on this in the first place are, well, big one, as it also is in the word cloud, is automation. And this is something that people think, oh, well, it's only going to hit certain sectors. You're only going to see truck drivers replaced. You're only going to see call centers replaced. But the truth is, the way artificially intelligent automation is going to work is it's likely to reduce the number of humans needed for any task. So this means less need, one would say, for pretty much anybody in any profession. Certainly anything that is like accounting, for instance, especially things to do with processing of that nature, are likely to be gone pretty quickly. And it's likely to be across any sector. And so right now we kind of have a free-for-all in what we support and what jobs exist and what we actually say people should do with their lives and what it provides. Which means, well, in the case of where I am in British Columbia, for instance, there's, of course, a ton of unemployment of young people, no job stability for a lot of people coming out of school, and also a shortage of doctors. But is there a way to get more doctors? We don't know, because it's not driven by people paying attention. So some of the other concerns are bias. There's been some drama going on with Google recently, which you may have heard about. There's also issues with training data. Bias can be introduced in more than one way, but when you have a whole set of information that you're basing any sort of processing on, it's likely to be based on this world in some way. And we've seen now they've shut down bots because they learned to be Nazis in 24 hours. Not a great thing. Other concerns, autonomous weapons, general kind of suspicion towards AI and a misunderstanding of it is also a kind of can be an issue, because that pushback can actually create kind of just delaying the inevitable, and in a way so we're not prepared. And then generally just safety and ethics and data and personal privacy. All really huge things I could talk about for a lot longer than an hour. So what's the goal here? And I mean this in a much bigger context. What's our goal? What is the goal of technology? What is the goal of having artificially intelligent systems? And what is our goal as people? And so from knowing people who are doing research and who go into technology, a lot of it comes from a very basic and often pure place. It's either one of wanting to understand the world, wanting to further research, wanting to improve technology, often for actually just improving the lives of humans, making things easier for us. And yes, some of it is also absolutely driven by profit and capitalistic mindset. But when it comes down to it, the goal of technology has been to make our lives easier and improve it. And so my goal in going into this subject was really to make sure that the adoption of AI is positive. And this positive potential is huge. It can be reducing human physical labor and the amount of work we have to do to be able to provide for everybody. It can mean having economies driven by things that are improving our lives, not just by survival. It can be streamlining health. It can be actually helping with our very, very, very necessary energy transition for the climate crisis. And it can be improving education, connecting people, and more than anything, handling a complex world that we're all stuck in now. So what I wanted to do, and what I think a lot of people who are in the safety and ethics realm of artificial intelligence and other emerging technologies, is maximize good. Make sure that this actually lands in the world in a way that's positive. And I think we're past that now. I don't think that it has landed entirely positively, but there is a lot of good that can come out of it. So what we want to do is make sure that we get the positive side and we avoid the negatives, because the negatives can be hugely scary. I saw Terminator on there. Kind of, yes, exactly. Like, those are real risks. Artificially intelligent weapons are a real problem that we've actually been pushing for an international treaty against them. And you have major players on side for that globally, and also some people who just aren't. And the reason they're not is because you have governments with militaries that already have AI weapons toys, and they're not willing to give them up. And most of the time when it comes to both the risks and the benefits, we're tied to what we currently have as a concept of the way technology functions with us, even if it's a little bit out of control. And so AI, in a sense, would be very different. And so it's hard to communicate this. And so that comes to the idea of influencing policy, which is very much necessary when you have something like this. And as we generally see, people who are in politics, many of them are there because they legitimately care, but they have a lot on their plates. So you show up, and it's hard to breach that barrier of explaining scientific concepts, technical concepts, and actually saying, no, this is something that needs to be taken just as seriously, if not more seriously, than a lot of the other things that get handed to someone on their plate. And that is really tough. And so my choice was actually to go straight into running for office, because I realized that getting airtime was going to be very difficult, and getting time in people's offices where they would actually take me seriously. So where are we on the policy landscape with artificial intelligence? Mostly, there's not much there. And that's largely what precipitated me going from studying astrophysics. And then I talked to my advisor, and we always had these like deep conversations about philosophy of life and what on earth is missing and how on earth we help with the future. And we came back to this so many times that there is just a gap in policy around technology. And this is something where we cannot afford in the same way to be reactive. We can't wait till all the stuff is just out there. We need some sort of preparation. And so there's a number of things that are reasonably easily achievable if you can actually get them through. Banning autonomous weapons, having some sort of guaranteed livable income, or robust, simple social safety net, so that if we have large-scale automation of half of the population, that there is a process for people to actually find new work, and we can go through that shift without just people falling through the cracks entirely. And ethics and safety regulations, currently there's no rules on the development of most technology, especially not artificial intelligence, and this is a big deal. There's a lot of research out there, but there are steps missing in implementation. Things that are related to this are also data privacy rights. And yeah, in general, because these things are going to change our society in such an immediate and transformative way, we want to make sure that policy is ready so that the change doesn't feel dramatic and sudden, because that's likely to cause turmoil, chaos, social unrest, etc. And we can actually prepare for job automation. And I actually think it's a fantastic opportunity for anybody to actually take it. So going into politics to do something about this, I never get to put myself on slides, so here you go. I jumped right in with the running for office thing, but there are a number of other ways that you can influence politics in general. So lobbying is kind of gross, but is unfortunately necessary in the system we have at the moment. And this can also just include meeting with politicians, convincing people, having good communications methods. And this applies to anything that you're interested in. Just seek out your elected officials and have that conversation. There's policy advising, and whether that's actually working in an office with somebody or doing what I'm kind of doing now, which is running a think tank and getting policy ideas written into policy statements that can be implemented and then pushing them some way or another. You can help other people run for office. And then I also want to make the distinction here between government and politics. So there are non-partisan ways and ways to work for the government, especially in policy advising, that do not involve stepping into the political fray. And this means going straight for the people in an administration, in a government, and say, hey, this is important, can we work on this? And you also see that in terms of the task force, the government's actually task forces that governments actually put into place, or committees, and you can give expertise or information there. But there's still often a disconnect. So I made the choice to actually just jump in there and run for office because I kind of knew that it was going to be really hard to sit down with a politician and have them understand the severity and the seriousness and the immediacy, the urgency of all these issues. So I also ended up, I kind of searched around because my goal was impact, not getting into office particularly. So I searched around our many parties for the way that that would be most possible. And the way to introduce this topic, start a national conversation about artificial intelligence and job automation. And so I got offered the position with the Green Party of being Science and Innovation Critic, which made me choose it because that meant that I got to write part of a national platform. And in doing so, we started the conversation about job automation at a national scale. Now, working with political parties is messy and it didn't quite happen the way that we would have hoped, but it happened. And so before the last election in 2019, this is something that started getting talked about. Not a single other party had policy on it. But just by stepping into that world, I immediately got to introduce a conversation and change the way people were talking about these issues. So one thing, though, at the end of it became really clear to me. There was something that I couldn't break down. So going into it, what did I want? I wanted a good future, one where people have stable lives, have meaningful lives, where we have a planet that's flourishing, not in crisis. And I was stuck between these forces. And this was the societal and political context that I was in. And that I realized it's the water that I couldn't quite change. And this is kind of what actually pushed me to run for leadership, was because we need to change the conversation itself. So what argument comes up? The argument that I was trying to avoid with artificial intelligence is this push and pull between no, we can't allow any changes because it means job automation, and everybody having a job is the most important thing that we have to defend. And people saying, no, I think that in order to have economic growth, we need a completely free market and we need to let all of this in. And to me, that is a completely false dichotomy because it's based on so many assumptions about what life is, what we're doing here, what it means to live on this absolutely incredible planet. And that's that we should not be thinking about the necessity of work the same way. We never should have been. What we want is a way to contribute, and we should not be thinking about the need to preserve either of these things from an economic growth standpoint if our goal is actually improving people's lives. So this is the narrative that exists out there. We need economic growth, and we need economic growth for development. And I picked this picture because this is where that is headed. The version of economic growth and development that is given to everybody, that we say is the right way to go about it. And I said capitalism and wealth here, but that isn't always true. We're not always saying capitalism across the planet, but there is an element of immediate consumerism, throwing stuff away, of extraction, of consumption, of waste that is pretty much everywhere. And we're saying that this is what we're basing everything on. This is the unchangeable part underneath. And I found in the political context in Canada, that's what all the other parties were arguing for in one way or another. Even the ones that were saying, yes, we need labor supports, we need to support people. They said, no, we need to do everything we can to stop automation, which is dangerous because it's happening anyway, and then you're not prepared. And so that argument that everybody was just like, jobs, we need jobs, we need jobs, I couldn't really take it anymore because why? we want something different than that, because at the basis of that concept of just jobs is that our value as people is based on our productivity, and that there aren't things. So for me, when I think about jobs, I think about all the other things that I consider meaningful work, like the arts, like research, like all these things. But when people are talking in the political context about jobs, often that's not what they're referring to. They're talking about human labor and making sure that everybody is required to do that in order to survive. So that's where, to me, the SDGs come in. So we have this hope as a planet. We have this framework put forward by the UN that is about having a way to, well, it's only 9 years from now, supposedly, that we should finish Agenda 2030, that this is the way that we as an entire planet can forward ourselves together to hopefully also stay within the planetary boundaries, which means not exhausting everything that we have, and sustainable in its core, truly meaning that we can keep this up for generations, forever. And right now we're not on a path that is sustainable. And all these goals are really meant to be achieved at once. So I'm talking about SDG 8, because that's the big barrier that I came down to when I was talking about tech policy, when I'm looking at these massive changes in the world. So I ended up with the Green Party. Climate crisis, also a really big deal. Personally, really a big deal in my life as well. But the idea of decent work and economic growth being things that we all strive for. And I think I realized that this means different things to different people. And right now, in this Western colonial context, it generally means one thing, and we're still trying to impose that on everybody else. And the problem that we come down to with this is what I've written at the bottom here, which is we're supposed to achieve all these goals at once. There's 17. They're all incredibly important. And yet the way that we're going about them right now is very pick and choose. And often people are doing work that negates someone else. So how are you expected to have clean air? How are you supposed to end hunger? How are you supposed to have a climate if the only option for economic growth that people are pushing is extraction, is destroying our natural resources and living in a way that does not actually work with everything around us? So that got me thinking about what the goal actually means when we come down to it. What does it mean to have decent work? What does it mean to have economic growth? Because right now, I think we look at our economic markers, and New Zealand's lucky because they got a new one recently. But we think about this kind of industrialization as what we quote unquote need. But to me, decent work has to do with meaning. And so I want to break that framework. And so let's talk about what it actually should mean to us globally. How can we actually make this goal make sense with the other ones as well? At the same time, you're not trading off. You're not saying, oh, well, in order to have economic development over here and manage to get people buildings by having concrete, that you have to then somehow offset that over here. And it's this puzzle that no one's trying to properly solve. How do we actually just aim for life in the future? Prosperity, a world that flourishes, that we have strong communities, that we have health for everyone, that we have societies developing in the way that they should, and that we have our basics, food, water, shelter, but that we also talk about the idea of work in terms of contributing, in terms of having livelihood and meaning in our lives. And this is something that I think, I had an influence from the community that I grew up in, from being at Mount Madonna, where, you are looking for meaning and you are looking to do something in the world that is a contribution, but it also is something for yourself. It's following your passion. And that is something that doesn't exist everywhere else. It's about survival. And so that concept of decent work shouldn't be about everybody just has to be doing something. because that's where we end up now. So we need to go to a place of true sustainability and stability. So I think the idea here is that we need to actually shift that perspective, the way we approach life, the way we approach work. And I say here as well as across the global south, because I think right now we have this tendency to impose these ideas of what work and economic growth are supposed to mean when we help people in development elsewhere. And I think that we need to take a step back from that and kind of change what we look at. And so what we need to start talking about is a new societal narrative, or perhaps an old societal narrative, where we focus on things like meaningful livelihood, decoupling survival from work, and valuing well-being over economic growth. So this is, to me, what SDG 8 really means and should mean, and the way we should approach it in a way that we can actually accomplish it along with all the other goals, because they'll need to work together. So this, though, is deeply relevant to tech policy and to artificial intelligence, because I realized I couldn't get anywhere having those conversations when people were stuck in one concept. And this is one where everybody has to have a job in order to survive. And meaning that they need to have an income that supports them to provide food, water, and shelter. Things that we really should be considering basic human rights beyond that we should be able to, with the prosperity that we have on this planet, provide for everyone without them needing to do work for survival. And people are so truly stuck in the mindset that we need this, you need work for survival, that the question always comes up, what will people do? If the entire job landscape changes, what will people do? And to that, I always say, well, look out the window. Okay, Siri thinks I'm speaking French, and then started on my phone. Okay, I say, look out the window. Look at this world. Is it our ideal world? Does this much poverty, does this much suffering, does this much lack of a possible future, does this really define what we should be doing on this planet, this amazing green and blue marble that floats in the middle of empty space? Is this what we really want to be doing? Because if not, I think we have a lot of work to do. But right now, the system, our economic system, does not encourage people to do that work. So there's a lot of work to be done. And I think that if we all finally get to a place where that's what is driving us, we allow people the freedom to find something to do that contributes to give back, we will all feel more satisfied, and we will have achieved a way to take care of each other as well. And I am both incredibly cynical and an optimist at the same time. So I think it's entirely possible that we move to this, because I think that we all, if we took a moment, hold this to be true. And right now, where everybody is actually living in a manufactured fear that there is nothing to hold them if everything changes. So we don't want to have the conversation about how to actually achieve all of the SDGs together. We don't want to have the conversation about what it means to have 50% job automation within the next decade. We don't want to talk about what it means to have climate crisis and catastrophe, because we are inherently taught to either expect everything to be fine or everything to completely be destroyed. So to actually track that middle ground, to walk that edge in the middle, to walk the middle road in a sense, it's not going to be easy, but we can do this if we change our framework. And if we change our framework to be one of empathy, of compassion, of kindness, of community, where we take care of each other. And what's interesting is that I started this from tech policy. I started this going down the road of saying, oh no, look, job automation and technological changes, I better go help with that. I better help policy be introduced. And this is where I ended up. I ended up saying, well, I think it's time to flip the table. And it's time to achieve everything that we need to achieve at the same time, because it's entirely doable. And we need to step past this fear and into hope, and into what I hope will bring a new era of life flourishing and people being able to live lives that are actually meaningful and fulfilling on this planet. Thank you. "30 minutes. Yay!
Very well done. Thank you, Amita. It's this time of the evening where the 12th grade and Shannon Kelly are going to lead a facilitated discussion.
Great, thank you. That was so interesting. So we, as you know the drill. We talked about this a little bit before, of what it's going to feel like to be on the other side of this, having gone through it as a student at Madonna School. The students have done their research, and they have a series of questions based on a variety of things that were of interest of them. I'm going to turn it over to Sarah Batista to introduce the class, and then we'll start with our questions. Thank you. And Sarah was having internet issues. So Savannah, if we can't get Sarah on here, Savannah is going to go ahead and do the introduction.
Hi, can you hear me? Am I good? Okay. Hi, my name is Savannah. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us tonight. We are the senior class at Madonna School, and as a part of our values and world thought class, we have prepared a series of questions for you. We are honored and very excited to take the opportunity to speak to you with a fellow Hawk. So I hope you enjoy.
Okay, Ami.
Okay, I guess it's my question first. Yeah. Okay. So my question is, so I read in your bio that you live somewhat off the grid, utilizing innovative and sustainable methods. What do you think is most important to know as our role attempts to transition to a more sustainable way of life?
Yeah, I do. Right now I'm in Vancouver, but I have a home on an island that is completely off the grid. So everybody there is like semi-homesteading, still get our groceries boated in sometimes, but actually on solar and micro hydro is what my house is run on. And we do have things like generators for what we call the shoulder season, which is when you don't have enough water yet and the sun's going away. But you actually do get also enough solar in winter, though we are further north. So I think that from that, connecting the two, the lesson that I draw on there is that we have issues with scale and globalization and supply chains, which I think became clear in the pandemic that we have issues. So I think the biggest thing to go forward to a resilient future is making sure that we actually can survive in a much more local area. So do we have the ability to produce energy, produce food, gather water, and have basic health supplies in a way that can be separated from everywhere else? And then also adding in like the tech concerns and other things like that, how do we make sure we actually can provide for everybody in that context, and also have everybody kind of have meaning in community? So main part there is having communities, having a scale where we actually have self-sufficiency at a reasonably local level, because I think that will mean that we are resilient to massive changes. And so that we saw kind of an example with this in the pandemic, but you also see it in terms of any sort of natural disasters, which are likely to get worse soon, and already have been, and I guess Texas this week, that you actually need an ability to have that survival on a local level.
Great, thank you, Ronan. We're going to go to your question next.
Okay, hello, my name is Ronan. In a tweet on December 10th, 2020, you said, thinking back to being at COP25, the 2019 Convention on Climate Change, at this time last year, and the lessons I learned. Global carbon markets are a scam, and indigenous peoples have the answers, but few are listening. What do you believe the answers are, and why aren't people listening?
I didn't realize we're going into my tweets. Good job. Yeah, so I did have the great honor of attending COP25 last winter, and it was eye-opening. And what I noticed is that we have a lot of countries across the globe that all show up to do politics. And you have a huge amount of people in either nonprofit or private sector in some way that are doing a huge amount of work and are really ready to transition everything, but the governments are having arguments with each other. But what they're also doing is they're imposing their politics from home on that international context. No one's really, well, I don't know what, no one. Some people are actually showing up legitimately, but for a lot of them, they're speaking to their audience back home. And so everybody is still continuing with massive fossil fuel expansion and saying we're going to offset it in these markets. And it is just basically still massively colonial. It's saying, oh, or you know, we're actually just going to have electric cars, and so we're going to just walk through, you know, untouched indigenous territory and take down a mountain, because that's what is required of us. And so I can't speak for all the answers that people had there, but I realized that the best I could do was attend all the presentations from indigenous leaders. And what's clear is that we have frameworks and blueprints for how to live on this planet that lasts for thousands and thousands of years. And they're not incompatible with a technological future either. There's just ways of understanding circular systems that work. And, you know, it's things that are seemingly new in conversation here, like circular economy, which are natural in indigenous ways of thought, that you can live on one place of land and have everything you need and have everything cycle back through. And so it's that in essence. But what was so interesting, what was more interesting to me than the solutions was the people ignoring them, the silence and the wall that was put up. Because surely one person who's just like, hey, look over there, is not going to be able to tell you all the things going on. And certainly I don't want to go down the road of appropriation or saying, well, like, oh, look, let's just go over there and let other people solve the problems that we've created. I actually think it needs to be the other way around, that we take responsibility for our colonial systems, our historic and ongoing genocides, and change that. But that conversation can be opened, and that we can actually all learn how to exist on these lands in a wholesome, sustainable way. And so what was fascinating was the systemic barriers that we've put up to that, and that there's so much racism and prejudice in the way of it. And that I think the solutions are a lot simpler. So I'll just give one example of that, which is that there's the term, which is nature-based solutions. And I don't know what you think of when you think nature-based solutions, but what people end up meaning by that is mimicking nature to do something like carbon capture instead of restoring ecosystems, which is going to be one of the best ways to actually have our planet be resilient and allow us and our societies to survive in some way.
Halen, you're next.
So my question was, in an interview, you talked about transforming exclusionary spaces into welcoming ones and bringing accountability to your party. What has your experience been like, and what advice would you have for someone trying to do the same in a new environment?
So this work started for me in physics at UCSC, for sure. And it's the same, I think, in any space where there is this kind of marginalization of anybody at all. So in the political space that I ended up in, I think that the framework and the basis of it is really important. So it's a colonial system of government, it's hierarchical, it's oppressive. And so you're stuck with that baseline And therefore you get all the things that come along with it, which like white supremacy, like heteronormativity, like cis supremacy, all these things that are automatically going to keep people out. And so that's the same for pretty much any system that you would encounter, any environment that you would enter. For the most part, unless someone's done a lot of work, at least in this general area, that's what you get. And that's how academia is structured as well. And there are, of course, lovely spaces and lovely people in a lot of these environments, but they're pushing back against this barrier. So what I meant by that is that we really need to seek a feeling of belonging for everybody and understanding. And it's tough because being in that space was jarring. I received a lot of direct hate, both in running and also running for leadership. And it's one thing to get hundreds of angry messages on Twitter. And honestly, just like if you're going to go into anything that involves that, you just need to let it be able to fall off your back. Those don't matter at all. And that's exactly how it was for me. But what ended up being difficult was the fact that there were so many people around who said over and over again that they wanted the environment to be different and they would stand up for other people's rights. Their silence in the face of that was the most telling and hurtful thing that I experienced. So how do you break that down? And I think how you do that is actually something very beautiful. And that is being willing to talk to people that don't maybe have the background of what do we call it, wokeness, that will allow people to have the right words for things, is to let everybody in with the understanding that to be there, your intention is kindness, and that you will forgive people for something that is hurtful by having a conversation, but also in a way that protects people who are marginalized. So if you experience something that's super painful, we won't make you have to talk to the person that hurt you, but we will also help that person understand what they did. But developing that culture of belonging starts close to home. And that's the thing that I'm actually most proud of for my campaign team for leadership, is that we started with this intention, just a couple of us, that we didn't want to exclude, that we wanted to include people, and that we knew that to face the monolith that is Canadian government and colonialism and hierarchical, patriarchal power, that we needed to be there for one another, that we needed to be there and create that support system that was unflinching, so that we can all actually like not just be one person, but like be arms linked in strength. And what was so amazing is that with that intention of a few people, we grew to a community of over 100 running that campaign, and everybody felt safe. And it wasn't just people from marginalized backgrounds that showed up. It was everybody. And by creating that agreement with one another, everybody exists in that space, feels safe, feels welcome, feels happy, and those communities can take down anything. So where does it start? It starts with an agreement between you and the couple people around you that you organize with, to have empathy, compassion, kindness, forgiveness, and stick to your principles.
Hi, Amita. I think I'm next in line for questions. Another tweet question. Recently you tweeted, "I have a PhD in astrophysics. I've served as science and innovation critic for a federal political party, etc. But at the end of the day, I get reduced to being a gender activist because I am who I am. How can we honor and acknowledge the importance of diversity in politics while also not reducing individuals to just being one aspect of their identity?"
Great question. I get angry on Twitter. Somehow still diplomatic, but I do it. Yeah, so I went into all of it with a certain disdain for identity politics, and I came out of it with a stronger loathing for identity politics. And I was there because I'm fighting for my basic rights. And this is something that, we hear. Being political is not a choice. It's a necessity for a lot of people. Partisanship irritates me to no end, but being political is very much necessary. And so I think that it's a fine balance, because we don't want to go down the road and saying, well, like, oh, we just need to kind of get everybody of these identities in, and then we'll have the perspectives we need and we're good. Because it really isn't that simple. And I think that it also actually is a kind of a process of remarginalization if we do that, because we say, oh, but you are just your identity. And there's no room for people to not be good people and have some sort of marginalized identity and not be there for the right reasons. Like, you want people to be there, to be good, to be improving the world, not just because they have some sort of identity. And I think it also is saying that, like, anybody who experiences marginalization is going to be able to be whatever. I don't think that's reasonable either, or want to. But we need to basically make it happen in a more organic way, so that we are encouraging people to get in. And this comes to the community again. We need the ability for people to exist in that space that's safe for them and supportive for them, so that we get that. And the other side of it is we need that representation, because there's so much stuff, especially when it comes to policy around gender, that is just like, you just want to, like, it's horrifying, because nobody knows, because no one has those lived experiences. So the people bringing lived experiences are really important, but it has to go along with everything else that they bring. So I think that the way to actually make it work is unfortunately a little bit of a longer road, but it's actually the stable one, because you put people in there for their identities, they get pushed out immediately. And I've seen this happen within political parties through tokenization, and it feels awful. And it also doesn't achieve what anybody who's actually fighting for their rights is hoping to achieve, because they get put there. You see it on boards as well. Oh, I'm going to put this one person here because we're lacking this diversity. And then what? They're supposed to answer and speak for everybody of their group. Are they supposed to actually then represent that? Are they then going to get asked to answer all those questions? And most of the time, they're going to be told that anything that they're actually going to say is going to get ignored, because the system itself is not changing. So what needs to happen is that kind of building of community and a combination. For their identities, but instead create the spaces. Inviting often is even the words we use: diversity, inclusion. Inclusion means you can come be here. It means that somebody else can come exist in this space. What does that mean? The space is still generally white supremacist, patriarchal, just by nature. And that doesn't serve anybody there. So by actually breaking that down and saying, we're going to change the essence of it, we will get that diverse representation, and nobody will feel reduced to their identity. And then hopefully also nobody will be put down for their identity, which is generally what happens, because you have this crowd that's like, oh, great, we have a such and such person now. We're really happy about this. We've achieved everything. And then they get to ignore their systemic problems. And then you have the people on the other side saying, like, oh no, we hate this person. And you're like, okay, nope, none of that is positive. Throw it out. Start over.
Thank you, Amita, for sharing your passion and work, and to Shannon Kelly, who is our director of our upper school and the 12th grade students, for facilitating this really meaningful conversation. We want to honor your time right now, so we do want to allow the audience and encourage the audience to ask questions. Either you can raise your hand or you can put your question in the chat box. And students, if you still have questions, of course, you too can ask your questions. Sarah, I see your hand up. Would you like to unmute?
Yes, please. Thank you. Amita, earlier during your presentation, when talking about maximizing good and influencing policy, you said, yes, there's a gap in policy regarding technology, and we can't be reactive. We can't wait until it has already happened. I have often regarded the difference between responding and reacting to situations. What is the response to these issues that you hope for and the reactions that you might fear?
With tech policy?
Yeah.
Yeah. So with technological changes, I think that we've seen what happens. If we take the example of social media, we allow the introduction of a technology with no preparation. So by preparation, we mean some sort of look at what the possibilities are, what can come of it. And we base our expectations on something else. And our expectations can be positive or negative. So I think on the AI side, you have the optimists, and then you have the people who are like, no, it's just going to be bad and it's going to be awful for all these reasons. And there's a lot to back that up because of, well, mostly bias issues and other things. But on the other side, with something like social media, we did the opposite. We said, this will bring the world together. What did we end up? A cesspool of misinformation and hate. So, now we're trying to regulate. So I think that the reactions that I'm hoping to have are that people actually get grounded, and we get to start to have that conversation to cross the barrier of jargon, basically, of this mindset of what it means to be in politics, be a politician, create policy, and how to actually link that up with the realities of the technology. So how do we then, well, what I would like to see, what I would like to hear is, how do we moderate this? How do we get those good things out of policy and politics and technology and avoid the things that are god awful? And I think that the risk here, and why I'm hoping for some sort of legitimate conversation as a reaction, is that we don't really have a positive outcome without something. We either end up with kind of a pushback where we say we don't want to go anywhere near this because it's scary. And then with no regulation, because that's still what you get there, you end up with all of this happening way too fast and in a really bad way because no one's paying attention. If instead we have that regulation, you end up with a moderated version, something where you actually have safety and ethics, some sort of reason. It's going to be messy. It's not going to be perfect, but that's what you hope for. The opposite, which is we support it instead with no regulation, is that you end up with the same thing, except on a different timeline. So without the pushback, the transition might not happen at the same time, but you end up with still all those like safety issues going full speed ahead.
So there are some comments that are popping up in the chat box. And Prabha said that no questions, but huge appreciation for the way you tied together so many disciplines in a way that serves humanity and the natural world. Beautiful way of looking at the possibilities and the responsibility we have to challenge norms in the status quo. So grateful to have Amita share her intelligence and genuine concern for a sustainable and equitable future for all. And so with that, if there's no more questions, if you really enjoyed this evening and you were inspired to act or to learn more, on March 18th, we have another Sustainable Development Seminar, and it's by